Hey everyone! Before we get started, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this community reaches. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe. Alright, let's jump into today's video. The case of Michaela Barley. 16-year-old Michaela Barley was, by all appearances, a typical teenager living in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, Canada, when she mysteriously vanished in 2016. In the days leading up to her disappearance, she mentioned to friends that she was planning to travel to different places and even claimed to have $5 in her bank account, though this would later be proven false by investigators. On Monday, April 11, 2016, she asked a friend to give her a ride to the local TD bank the following morning. That same day, she was in contact with her bank multiple times and transferred $25 into her account. Later that evening, Michaela sent a series of messages to several friends, expressing that she was upset and in need of help, though she never disclosed what was troubling her. The following morning at 6:41 a.m. on April 12th, she reached out again to the same friend about the ride to the bank, but was told the bank wouldn't be open yet. As usual, Michaela's grandmother drove her to school. Surveillance footage captured her placing a binder into her locker at 8:21 a.m., and that was the last confirmed sighting of her. 9 minutes after entering her school, Michaela was captured on surveillance footage exiting through the back door. In the aftermath of her disappearance, investigators were able to piece together a detailed timeline of her movements that morning using CCTV footage. It showed her heading southeast along the railroad tracks and making a stop at a local pawn shop. The shop owner later reported that she attempted to pawn a silver ring, but he declined as it held too little value. Between 8:50 and 8:55 a.m., Michaela was seen withdrawing $55 from her bank account. By 9 a.m., she was observed walking east along Broadway Street. Surveillance cameras then captured her at 9:10 a.m. entering a Tim Hortons Wendy's combination restaurant, where she bought a drink and sat down. At one point, CCTV footage showed her disassembling and reassembling her phone, which led some to speculate that she might have been changing SIM cards. 15 minutes later, she briefly left, came back in, and exited again through a different door. Around that same time, she was seen walking in a counterclockwise loop around the restaurant. At 9:49 a.m., she returned once again and took a seat at a different table. During the next 20 minutes, she frequently used her phone, including making lengthy phone calls. At 10:12, she texted a friend saying, "Hey, I need help." But it was followed up a few minutes later with, "Never mind, I figured it out." During her time at the restaurant, she also spoke with an older woman who revealed to police that Michaela had tried to ask her for help in booking a hotel room, but the woman refused to get involved. The 16-year-old used her phone again after this and left the restaurant for a final time. Sometime after 10:45 a.m., Michaela disappeared from CCTV view. But an employee at a local bus depot remembered her and told authorities that she'd inquired about when the next bus to Regina would leave. When she was told that it wouldn't be until 5 p.m., she left without purchasing a ticket. At 11:35 a.m., she messaged a friend, "I'll see you at lunch." She met with her friends at 11:59 after re-entering the school, where she told them about her plans to visit Regina for a break. She left school again at 12:03 p.m. and subsequently headed to the Trail Stop restaurant next to the bus depot, where she ordered food. Eyewitnesses later informed investigators that she left the restaurant between 1 and 1:45 p.m. Further CCTV footage of Michaela is not available after this point, and her movements are unknown. The police were unable to confirm whether or not she got on any buses from the depot. Michaela did not have a passport with her at the time of her disappearance, and her bank account and social media accounts have been dormant since April 12, 2016. The only exception to this is that a Snapchat message sent to her by a friend was opened in July of that year. Authorities were unable to confirm whether anyone actually viewed the messages Michaela sent. Her phone was switched off at 6:51 a.m. on April 13th, the morning after she was last seen. Her disappearance was first noticed by her grandmother, who went to pick her up from school only to find out Michaela hadn't attended all day. Michaela's grandmother and mother searched for her on their own for several hours before reporting her missing to the authorities. Unfortunately, the investigation into her disappearance yielded limited results. While investigators managed to establish a detailed timeline of Michaela's movements that morning using CCTV footage, text messages, and social media activity, they lost track of her after she left the restaurant and struggled to find further clues about what happened next. A significant challenge in the case was the difficulty authorities faced in obtaining cooperation from social media companies regarding Michaela's private messages, which hindered the investigation. In August 2017, more than a year after her disappearance, police searched a wooded area near her high school but came up empty. Around the same time, a person of interest emerged when it was revealed Michaela had been seen leaving the restaurant with a man. However, after speaking with investigators, he was ultimately ruled out as a suspect in her disappearance. Furthermore, police located several online friends of Michaela, but this gave them nothing more to work with. Though there has been very little evidence in Michaela's case, speculation has been abundant. Her own mother has expressed fears that her daughter became a victim of human trafficking, reportedly made her sound unhappy, and indicated that she planned to leave. But her mother noted that those posts were very old and not relevant to her at the time she went missing. Her mother has also noted that Michaela left behind her acne medication and the money she kept at home for emergencies. The most prominent theory in Michaela's case is that she fell victim to an online predator. This is in part because she had an active online social life. On March 21, 2016, she wrote on her Snapchat and Instagram accounts, "Looking for Snapchat friends because I have no one in real life." This has led to speculation that she was approached by somebody with sinister intentions who possibly groomed her and lured her into leaving Yorkton. Notably, the 16-year-old was also a user of the Kik messaging app, which has been subject to several controversies. It has been accused of providing anonymity to potential predators. Michaela's real-life friends have stated that they don't know much about her online social life. Her mother, Paula, has stated, "In my heart as a mom, I continue to choose to believe that she's alive. Until someone can prove otherwise, I will believe that." There have been reported sightings of Michaela across the country, but none have been definitively confirmed as her. The RCMP has followed up on more than 1,000 tips from the public, but still has no solid leads. Michaela Barley has been missing since April 12, 2016. She is described as a white female with blonde hair and blue eyes, standing about 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing approximately 114 pounds at the time she disappeared. She has a small scar on her right earlobe. When last seen leaving the Trail Stop restaurant, Michaela was wearing blue jeans, a burgundy jacket, a teal scarf, and embroidered burgundy suede boots. She was also carrying a blue plaid backpack. If she is still alive today, Michaela would be 23 years old. Anyone with information about her case is encouraged to contact the RCMP at 40518. The case of Elizabeth Paula Arellano. In the spring of 2016, in the quiet town of Fort Worth, located in the state of Texas, there was a brutal and cynical murder that shocked even the most experienced investigators. The victim of the crime was a young mother of many children named Elizabeth Paula Arellano, who worked as a paramedic, and you will be shocked to learn who was her executioner. The circumstances of the tragedy were so strange that at first the police even put forward the theory that Elizabeth may have voluntarily passed away. However, such a theory did not fit with the testimony of people who became accidental witnesses of the terrible scene. The investigation had to do a lot of hard work to understand everything and send the criminal to the dock. However, given the brutality of the crime he committed, the sentence handed down seemed too lenient and unfair to many. Elizabeth Paula Arellano was born in 1987, August 16th, in the American city of Fort Worth, Texas, where she was destined to live all her short life. She grew up with her two sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna, with whom she was always practically inseparable. Elizabeth's birth father left the family when she was very young. He showed no interest in the fate of his daughter and did not contact her in any way. Soon her mother, Juanita, remarried to a man named Fidel, who adopted her children and treated them as his own. Elizabeth had a very warm relationship with her stepfather, who supported and helped her in everything. The girl studied diligently at school and dreamed of one day becoming a doctor. In high school, she met a guy named Rudolph Ariano, with whom she soon had a romantic relationship. The young man was almost 8 years older than her, which somewhat embarrassed Elizabeth's parents, but they did not interfere with their romance because the chosen daughter seemed to them a man serious and quite reliable. At the age of 16 years, barely out of school, Elizabeth married her lover legally. The couple, one after another, had 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. But despite the appearance of numerous heirs, Elizabeth did not intend to become a housewife. She remembered her childhood dream, so Elizabeth graduated from medical school and got a job as a paramedic, planning to get a higher education to become a doctor. The young woman was kind and pious, brought up in Christian traditions. She regularly took her children to church, instilling in them love and compassion for their neighbors. Family and friends characterized her as a very responsive person, always ready to help. From the outside, their marriage with Rudolph seemed strong and happy. But after 13 years of living together, this union began to literally crack at the seams. Rudolph had been jealous of his young wife before, trying to control her and everything. But over time, his behavior became simply unbearable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth, after another jealousy scene organized by her husband, took the children and moved to the house of her parents. Rudolph made an attempt to reconcile with his wife, but the young woman was tired of tolerating his fits of anger. In addition, she did not want the children almost every day to listen to the parents' scandals. So she gathered her courage and officially filed for divorce. A few days after Elizabeth took the children and filed for divorce, she mysteriously disappeared. According to friends and family, she was in good spirits. And, in order to distract herself from family problems and a little divorce, decided after work to go with colleagues to a local club. So, on Friday evening, April 15, 2016, the 28-year-old young mother in the company of her friends went to a fun place. There she danced and had a good time, but did not touch alcohol because she planned to get home in her own car on which she arrived at the club. Elizabeth returned home well past midnight on April 16th. Having parked the car, she called her friend with whom she had vacationed at the club that night and told her that she had already reached home and that she was all right. Elizabeth then hung up the phone, but never entered the house. The next morning, her mother Juanita was very worried when she found her daughter was not home. She knew that Elizabeth was planning to spend the evening with friends, but her daughter should have returned long ago. She couldn't leave somewhere unannounced, and besides, her car was parked outside the house, which meant that Elizabeth had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, it turned out that it was not locked. The key was still sticking in the ignition, and inside on the seat were her daughter's purse and cell phone. Naturally, she couldn't leave her personal belongings in the open car like that, which meant that something terrible had happened. The woman immediately called the police, reporting a missing person. The police believed that they would be able to solve the case, as they call it, on hot tracks. In addition, there was still hope that Elizabeth was alive because there was no blood or signs of struggle in the car. But it wasn't that simple. The first thing was to reconstruct in the smallest detail the chronology of the events of that evening and night, to trace Elizabeth's entire route, to find and question all possible witnesses. First, friends and colleagues of the young woman with whom she had spent the evening before her disappearance were interviewed. They gave the exact time when she went home, and later Elizabeth herself called back, saying that she had reached the place safely. In addition, several calls and messages from her ex-husband, Rudolph Ariano, who had persistently tried to contact her that night, were found in the missing person's cell phone, but Elizabeth never answered him. Police officers went to Rudolph's house to find out where he was and what he was doing the previous evening and night. According to the man, he had been in contact with his ex-spouse just the night before, and she had promised that she would bring the children to him for the weekend. But afterward, she stopped answering the phone, and he thought she had changed her mind. As for an alibi, Ariano's alibi was questionable. According to him, he sat with a friend at a local bar that evening, and around midnight he returned to his home and went to bed. His friend and several other people who had been relaxing at the same establishment on Friday confirmed that Rudolph was indeed there, but where he went afterward, no one could say for sure. The man assured that he had gone home, but as he now lived alone, there was no one to confirm this. Thus, the police were not going to exclude Mr. Ariano from the list of suspects. Besides, he didn't seem upset or worried. It was clear that he and Elizabeth were in the process of divorce, but they had been married for many years. She was the mother of his children, and it was strange that her disappearance had not affected him in any way. On the night of the disappearance of a young mother, a fisherman called the emergency services to report a strange incident he had witnessed. The man said that he was sitting alone with a fishing rod on a bridge, which is part of an interstate highway. When about 4:30 o'clock in the morning, he noticed a car drive onto the bridge, stop, and then the driver pulled out something large that looked like a person and threw it into the water. It also appeared to him that something bulky and obviously heavy was tied to this person. Since the fisherman was at a great distance and it was still dark, he could not see details nor could he see the make and number of the car. In addition, there was a strong wind on the bridge, so the man could not hear anything. Soon, another witness was found walking at night with his dog down by the bridge. He did not see what was happening on the bridge itself, but a heartbreaking scream caught his attention. Then he saw something large flying down from the bridge, followed by a splash and then silence. Based on the testimony of witnesses, the police decided to examine the bottom of the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers came across a body with a massive piece of concrete tied to its neck with a rope. The drowned woman turned out to be the missing Elizabeth Ariano. Had it not been for the testimony of a passerby and a fisherman, her body would probably have been discovered very soon or not found at all because the tide weight did not allow the body to float. Then, a version was put forward that the young woman decided to leave her life voluntarily against the background of problems in the family. But this assumption was untenable because it did not fit with the testimony of a witness who saw how someone threw her into the water, nor with the words of relatives, who assured that Elizabeth made great plans for life and would never do this to her children and parents. Elizabeth was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied to her neck and thrown off the bridge. This was evidenced by the forensic medical results, which showed that the young woman had suffocated, and by the testimony of a man who heard her desperate scream as she flew down the bridge. But who and for what reason could have so brutally massacred a mother of many children? Robbery was not considered because none of Elizabeth's belongings were taken. There were suggestions that the killer could have spotted Elizabeth in the club and then followed her home, or someone guarded her at home, waiting for her to return. The ex-husband of the deceased continued to insist that he was sleeping at his home on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with the crime. However, the investigators were still in no hurry to exclude Rudolph from the number of suspects because he had no alibi, and his behavior raised more and more questions. At the funeral, the man put on an act. He wept at the coffin of his ex-wife, saying that he would like to be in her place or die with her. According to his sister Elizabeth, she even believed in the sincerity of his words. In addition, Rudolph actively helped in the creation of a charitable foundation to raise funds for the ceremony of farewell to his wife. But after the funeral, when the man was once again called to testify, he already looked and behaved completely different, as if nothing bad had happened in his life. After a detailed examination of all the CCTV footage from the last route Elizabeth took, it was determined that a car of the same make and color as Rudolph's had driven away from her parents' house around 3 a.m. The neighbor also recalled seeing the car parked on the road near the deceased's house. Their neighbor also recalled seeing the car parked on the road not far from the deceased's house. Moreover, it was established that the car had subsequently driven towards the very bridge from which the woman had been thrown. This circumstance raised many questions. And when the investigation requested Rudolph's cell phone data on the night of the crime, the questions became even more. It turned out that the man made several calls that night. First, near Elizabeth's place of work, and then near the home of his mother-in-law and father-in-law. He also sent his ex-wife several messages trying to find out when she would return, but his messages went unanswered. Apparently, he had been following her and eventually decided to wait for her return at Elizabeth's parents' house. The police finally had enough evidence to arrest Rudolph as the prime suspect and bring him to the station for further questioning. One of the key witnesses in the case was Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son. When the boy was shown the rope removed from his mother's neck, the son stated that he had seen it earlier in the backyard of his father's house and remembered it well because he had played with it. Moreover, the boy also recognized a piece of concrete that had been lying in their garden shortly before after the fence had been replaced. Also, small fragments of this concrete were found in the trunk of the car belonging to Rudolph. The investigation found that the man waited for his ex-wife at her parents' home and abducted her before she could enter the house. He forced her into his car, in the trunk of which he had already prepared rope and concrete. Afterward, he drove to the bridge for the massacre, expecting to go unnoticed. Rudolph Ariano was taken into custody 10 days after his ex-wife's body was recovered from the lake. Despite a large amount of evidence and witness testimony proving his guilt, Rudolph denied any involvement in the crime and continued to insist that he was at home that night. Given the brutality of his actions, Rudolph was facing the ultimate penalty of death. And then, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to confess to everything and cooperate with the investigation to mitigate the sentence. It wasn't until January 2019 that Ariano pleaded guilty in court and detailed how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife and the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was in the courtroom listening to his story, fainted, and Alessandra and Giovanna called their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph himself, though he admitted his guilt, felt no remorse or pangs of conscience. He spoke indifferently and coldly about his murder, did not apologize, and did not explain the motive for his terrible act. The court sentenced the murderer to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family members, although they considered such a sentence rather mild, but noted that they forgive Rudolph because they do not want their hearts to boil with hatred. Her parents and sisters are now responsible for the upbringing of the deceased woman's children. The case of Stephen Beard. Stephen Beard embodied the American dream. A retired television executive and self-made millionaire, he built his wealth and reputation through determination and hard work. His extravagant lifestyle in Austin, Texas, living in a vast mansion, reflected his success. However, beneath his polished exterior was a man yearning for companionship after the loss of his first wife. That's when Celeste Johnson entered the picture, a 30-year-old waitress at a local Austin country club who caught Stephen's eye with her striking looks and infectious charm. Stephen, then in his 60s, was captivated by Celeste's vibrant personality despite their more than 30-year age gap. For Celeste, the relationship was an opportunity to leave behind a troubled past and gain financial security. Raised in poverty, she endured a difficult childhood marked by emotional hardship and instability. By the time she met Stephen, she had already been through several failed marriages and struggled to support her twin daughters, Jennifer and Christina. Stephen gave Celeste not only the luxurious lifestyle she longed for but also a sense of security. Their whirlwind romance culminated in marriage in 1995. To outsiders, their relationship seemed like a fairy tale. However, early signs of trouble soon emerged. Stephen spared no expense to ensure Celeste and her daughters enjoyed the finest things life could offer. The family traveled to distant destinations, indulged in shopping sprees, and relished the comforts that wealth provided. Even by Stephen's generous standards, Celeste's spending was excessive. She filled their home with designer clothes, lavish furnishings, and luxury items that often stretched beyond his reasonable budget. Her unquenchable thirst for material possessions made Stephen, who was always giving, increasingly worried about the growing financial strain. But the problems ran deeper than just money. Because of Celeste's erratic mood swings, which caused tension in the home, Stephen had to manage an emotional minefield. One moment, Celeste might be warm and loving, and the next, she would lash out in wrath or retreat into despair. His colleagues saw that Stephen, who had previously been an extroverted and self-assured man, had changed and appeared withdrawn as a result of his attempts to maintain Celeste's happiness. His worry for his daughters-in-law also increased as he saw how their mother's erratic behavior affected them in spite of these difficulties. As the honeymoon period of Stephen and Celeste Beard's marriage wore off, the reality of their mismatched personalities and lifestyles came into sharp focus. Despite this, Stephen remained committed to the marriage, hoping that he could help Celeste move toward a more stable life. His love and loyalty for her would set the stage for a tragedy that no one could have predicted. Celeste's lavish tendencies and emotional instability quickly obscured the idyllic picture Stephen had planned to maintain, which was a life of calm comfort and friendship. Celeste's spending patterns become more and more. She was careless and frequently visited upscale stores and salons, accumulating a collection of designer clothing, jewelry, and lavish home furnishings. Despite his affluence, Stephen, who took pleasure in his financial prudence, started to worry about the growing costs. His discomfort increased when Celeste made rash investments and big purchases without asking him, and Stephen temporarily catered to her whims. This resulted in tense discussions that showed the deepening rift between them that underpinned their financial disagreements. Stephen had to be on guard because of Celeste's emotional instability and mood swings. At times, she was charming and charismatic, captivating everyone around her. And at other times, she would spiral into fits of anger or despair, isolating herself from her family. As these episodes increased in frequency, Stephen started confiding in close friends that he was unsure of how to handle his wife's unpredictable behavior in the midst of this chaos. Although Stephen made an effort to provide the girls a feeling of normalcy, Celeste's twin daughters, Jennifer and Christina, were the ones who suffered the most from their mother's instability. They frequently saw their mother's tantrums and unpredictable choices. The family became much more complicated as Celeste's relationship with her kids deteriorated as they matured into teenagers. Dynamic. When Celeste's mental health problems reached a breaking point in 1999, she checked herself into St. David's Pavilion, a mental health facility in Austin. Although Stephen and Celeste's marriage was tense, Stephen supported her decision in the hopes that it would give her the support she needed. But this period of Celeste's life would result in a relationship that would forever alter their paths. While at St. David's, Celeste met Tracy Tarden, another patient at the facility. A middle-aged woman named Tracy, who battles drinking and despair, was captivated to Celeste's magnetic personality. The two women bonded right away and found comfort in each other's weaknesses. Tracy fell in love with Celeste as a confidant and emotional support system as her charms worked their spell. Although Stephen's love for Celeste remained strong, his patience was wearing thin. He hoped that Celeste's time and treatment would help his marriage, but he was cautious because the cracks had deepened, and he could not have predicted that the seeds of betrayal had already been planted in the sterile, fluorescent-lit halls of St. David's Pavilion, the exact location where Celeste had gone to seek help. When Celeste Beard and Tracy Talton first met, they were both battling personal issues. Although their origins were very different, Celeste's mounting marital stress and Tracy's struggles with chronic depression and alcoholism forged a relationship of vulnerability that would quickly turn into a dangerous obsession. Despite her seeming achievements, Tracy Tarton was a bright, well-educated lady who had managed a bookstore in Austin and was well known for her keen sense of humor and passion for books. Tracy had experienced severe personal hardships throughout her life. Unlike Celeste, whose charisma frequently concealed her inner turmoil, she sought stability and recovery at St. David's Pavilion as a result of her struggle with alcoholism and despair. They seemed to be drawn to each other because of the contrast created by Tracy's open display of pain. During group therapy sessions, Celeste's charm worked smoothly on Tracy. She enthralled everyone with tales of her lavish life with Stephen, portraying herself as a misunderstood, trapped woman who was a victim of her circumstances. Beyond her control, Celeste showed up as a ray of hope for Tracy, who was desperate for purpose and connection. Outside of treatment, the two women spent hours together discussing personal elements of their lives. Celeste told Tracy how unhappy she was with her marriage, describing Stephen as a cold, domineering husband who didn't care about her needs. While Celeste's stay at St. David's was brief, her relationship with Tracy lasted outside the facility's walls after she was discharged. She kept in regular contact with Tracy, visiting her and calling her frequently. Their relationship raised eyebrows among those who knew her, especially Stephen, who became suspicious of Celeste's growing closeness to her new friend. These stories, though frequently fabricated or exaggerated, reinforced Tracy's desire to protect and support Celeste over time. When Stephen saw how intense Celeste and Tracy's relationships were, his uneasiness grew. Tracy was a regular visitor to the Beard residence, and her presence upset the dynamic of the home. Tracy's closeness to their family was uncomfortable to Jennifer and Christina, who were already stressed out by their mother's erratic behavior. She was more than simply a friend. She appeared to have a special influence over their mother, which made Stephen even more nervous and private. The relationship between Celeste and Tracy took a darker turn as Celeste's manipulative nature came to light. She skillfully preyed on Tracy's feelings and vulnerabilities, painting herself as a victim trapped in a controlling marriage and implying that true happiness and freedom could only come if Stephen was removed from the picture. Eager to earn Celeste's approval and played the role of rescuer, Tracy found herself ensnared in a web of lies that ultimately led her down the wrong path. Though Tracy might not have fully grasped how deeply she was being used, the plan against Stephen was set in motion during this period. With Celeste relying on Tracy's loyalty and eventually her cooperation, motivated by Stephen's wealth and life insurance policies. As their bond grew stronger, Celeste's marriage began to unravel. Stephen, unaware of the true nature of their relationship, could only watch helplessly as his wife became increasingly distant. What began as a chance meeting at a mental health facility quickly evolved into a dangerous alliance with catastrophic consequences for everyone involved. Stephen's anxiety mounted as he noticed Tracy's constant presence in their lives. She regularly visited the Beard mansion, showed up at family gatherings, and became woven into Celeste's daily routine. Celeste's unpredictable behavior added fuel to Stephen's concerns. Her late-night phone conversations, covert meetings, and a contemptuous demeanor, Celeste appeared more comfortable discussing her displeasure with Stephen and giving the impression that significant changes were imminent whenever he inquired about her relationship with Tracy. Jennifer and Christina sensing that something was seriously amiss, Celeste's twin girls began to worry about their mother's behavior. Because of Celeste's increasing manipulation, Tracy thought that the only way to move on was to get rid of Stephen. Unaware that she was being used as a pawn in Celeste's larger plan, which was driven by greed and a desire for freedom, Tracy became obsessed with the concept of defending the woman she loved. As their bond grew, so did the threat that loomed. Unaware of the sinister plot developing behind closed doors, Stephen Beard stayed devoted to his wife, despite her feelings for him shifting towards something much more harmful. With a 20-gauge shotgun in hand, Tracy carried out the plan on the evening of October 2, 1999, sneaking into the Beard mansion while it was dark. As Tracy stood in the darkened room, thinking about Celeste's remarks, she fired a single shot into Stephen's belly, seriously wounding him despite his injuries. Stephen was asleep in his bedroom, totally ignorant of the danger that lurked nearby. Stephen was able to call 911, his voice shaking as he told the dispatcher, "I've been shot. I think my guts are hanging out." Paramedics rushed him to the hospital where doctors battled to save his life. He survived the initial attack, but his injuries were severe and left him in a fragile state. At the crime scene, investigators discovered a spent shotgun shell, which would later link Tracy to the crime. Meanwhile, Celeste played the role of the distraught wife, remaining calm but concerned. However, those closest to Stephen, including his stepdaughters, felt that something was amiss, and their suspicions grew. Over the next few weeks, Stephen underwent numerous surgeries and a taxing recuperation process, but his condition worsened. Stephen Beard passed away on January 22, 2000 due to a deadly blood clot brought on by his wounds. When he passed away, the case changed from an assault to a full-fledged homicide inquiry, and investigators focused more on Celeste and Tracy's peculiar bond. Investigators found contradictions, but Tracy remained faithful and refused to incriminate Celeste. Witnesses recalled Celeste's infatuation with Stephen's wealth and her frequent complaints about him. Financial documents exposed Celeste's extravagant spending patterns and her renewed interest in Stephen's life insurance policy. Despite the growing suspicion, Celeste continued to live a lavish lifestyle that seemed unaffected by her husband's passing. She went on expensive vacations, went shopping, and even began dating someone else. These actions further strengthened investigators' resolve to prove that she had planned the crime. But the case's turning point would not be forensic evidence, but rather Tracy's own growing guilt and disillusionment. Detectives were under tremendous pressure to find answers after Stephen Beard's death in January 2000, which escalated the case from attempted murder to homicide. Since there were no signs of forced entry, and Stephen's own 911 call provided little clue as to the identity of the shooter, investigators focused on his closest family members, especially his wife, Celeste Beard. Investigators questioned Celeste's behavior after Stephen's death, noting how quickly she moved on from the tragedy. Instead of grieving, Celeste seemed to revel in her newfound financial freedom, spending lavishly on upscale vacations and starting a new relationship with Cole Johnson, whom she would eventually marry. When police brought Tracy Tarleton in for questioning, she first refused to implicate Celeste, claiming she acted alone. However, detectives weren't convinced that Tracy's obsession with Celeste was well known, and they suspected she hadn't acted without encouragement. This was the case's turning point when forensic evidence connected the shotgun shell found at the scene to a weapon that Tracy had purchased. Investigators started to piece things together. A story of lies and manipulation. Celeste and Tracy's acquaintances testified about their abnormally close friendship, with some implying that Tracy liked Celeste romantically. While Celeste insisted that Tracy had acted independently out of jealousy and obsession, witnesses claimed to have heard her complain about Stephen and express a wish for a life free from his control. However, financial records revealed otherwise. Due to her substantial debt, Celeste had a quick escape, thanks to Stephen's multimillion-dollar mansion. After months of investigation, Tracy finally broke her silence as the mounting pressure and growing suspicions took a toll on her mental health. In her confession, Tracy revealed that Celeste had manipulated her into believing Stephen was violent, and that their only chance to be together was if he was dead. In March 2002, Celeste Beard was arrested and charged with capital murder and conspiracy to commit murder, leading to a high-profile trial that exposed the full extent of her betrayal. Tracy's confession, which included chilling details about how Celeste carefully orchestrated the crime without directly committing the act, became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case, highlighting the deception and manipulation that led to Stephen Beard's murder. Tracy explained how Celeste skillfully exploited her emotions, portraying Stephen as a controlling figure who needed to be removed for their happiness. Celeste planted the idea by subtly and repeatedly mentioning Stephen's supposed abuse, though she never explicitly asked Tracy to carry out the murder. Investigators uncovered damning phone records, letters, and witness testimonies that revealed Celeste's ongoing pattern of manipulation. Friends and family recounted how Celeste often talked about Stephen's wealth and expressed dissatisfaction with their marriage. Jennifer and Christina, her twin daughters, provided key testimony, stating that their mother showed little emotion after Stephen's death and quickly moved on with her life. Tracy was hopelessly infatuated and thought she was acting to protect the woman she loved. In contrast, Celeste insisted that Tracy acted alone out of jealousy, claiming that Tracy had become obsessed with her and independently devised the murderous scheme. Prosecutors contended that Celeste's extravagant lifestyle was her main motivation, presenting evidence that she had spent excessively on luxury items and had grown increasingly irritated with Stephen's attempts to control her spending. The life insurance policy worth millions of dollars was a powerful incentive to remove Stephen from the picture. Tracy's history of mental health issues and her desire to get Celeste's devotion at any cost were used by Celeste's defense lawyers to try to undermine her testimony, but the evidence was too strong. Prosecutors painted Celeste as a skilled manipulator who took advantage of Tracy's emotional weaknesses in order to further her own self-serving objectives. As the trial date drew near, Celeste's once glamorous life fell apart around her. The woman who had once lived in luxury and power was now confronted with the harsh reality of a murder charge that could put her behind bars for life in March 2003. The public was eager to see if her charm could once again save her from the consequences of her actions. When Celeste Beard's eagerly awaited trial got underway in Austin, Texas, the courtroom was crowded with reporters. The bereaved family of Stephen Beard and onlookers were anxious to see if the prosecution could establish Celeste as the murder's mastermind. The prosecution made a strong case that Celeste was a cunning and avaricious woman who used Tracy Tartan's love and devotion to plan the murder. Their strategy was based on Tracy's testimony, which described how Celeste had gradually persuaded her that Stephen's death was necessary. Jennifer and Christina, Celeste's twin daughters, testified against their mother, describing how she showed little remorse after Stephen's death and swiftly moved on with a new man. They also disclosed that Celeste frequently spoke negatively about Stephen and talked about how much easier life would be without him. Prosecutors also presented they claimed that Stephen's multimillion-dollar inheritance and life insurance policy were the main reasons behind Celeste's conduct, despite financial data demonstrating that she had been living above her means and was heavily indebted. Celeste's extravagant shopping sprees, costly trips, and plans to renovate the mansion were emphasized as blatant signs of her motivation. By depicting Tracy as a mentally ill woman who acted alone out of unrequited love, Celeste's defense team attempted to refute the prosecution's narrative. They claimed that Celeste never asked Tracy to kill Stephen and that Tracy misunderstood Celeste's words because of her fragile mental state. The defense also tried to shift blame by claiming that Tracy's obsession drove her to commit the crime without Celeste's involvement, but Celeste's actions during the trial hurt their case. After several days of deliberation, the jury found Celeste Beard guilty of capital murder and conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years, bringing closure to Stephen Beard's family, who had long suspected her involvement. As Celeste was escorted from the courtroom, the gravity of her situation appeared to settle in. She showed little emotion, reinforcing the prosecution's depiction of her as manipulative and self-centered. Her life had effectively ended, and she now faced decades behind bars. Tracy Tarleton, meanwhile, received a 20-year prison sentence with the possibility of parole after serving part of her term, having accepted a plea deal in exchange for her testimony. The trial exposed a shocking tale of manipulation, greed, and betrayal, a stark warning about the destructive power of obsession and deceit. The case of Paula Andrea Salazar. Paula Andrea Salazar was born on September 6, 2015 in Venezuela. Her mother, Andrina Bermudos Median, was from Machurina, Menegas. Her father, Leonardo Salazar, was from Tucupito, a town in the state of Delta Amacaro. A year after Paula was born in September 2016, the couple decided to immigrate with their child to Ecuador. They were looking for a better life for themselves and their daughter a month after moving to Quito, capital of Ecuador. Relationship in the family deteriorated for a number of reasons. Andrina decided to break up with Leonardo and soon moved to Cuenca, the third largest city in Ecuador. She took Paula with her. In Cuenca lived the mother of her best friend, who kindly offered to let her and the girl stay in the house while they found another place to live and work. Leonardo, the girl's father, given the breakup and other circumstances, decided to return to Venezuela, to his hometown of Tucupito, and after a while immigrated again, this time to Trinidad, Tobago. At that time, Leonardo had already been disabled for a long time. The man's left arm had been completely disabled after an accident he had suffered while driving a motorcycle at a very young age. Since the man could not use his left arm, it was apparently difficult for him to find a good job even in Ecuador's capital city. After Enrina moved to Cuenca, she almost completely stopped communicating with Leonardo, only informing him once that she has taken a job on a farm in Tapacondo. A few months after separating from Leonardo, Andrina entered into a new romantic relationship with a man named Washington Andreas Aymero. Andreas was a local Ecuadorian, and more importantly, he was the owner of the farm where Andrina worked. The man grew up in a wealthy family. When Paula was about a year and a half, Andrina moved to a man together with Paula. Andreas and Andrina had a child together on April 7, 2019. With a newborn baby, family became happier and more united. However, everything changed when an event happened on March 27, 2020. It completely changed the lives of everyone involved. At the time, family was living well, enjoying every day, and things were going well on the farm. On one such day, as happy as it seemed, Andreas took Paula and by car went with her to flower plantations. On the way there, girl got very sick. She became dizzy and began to vomit. Andreas had no choice but to stop at a public restroom. As soon as he and the girl entered it, Paula vomited again. He decided to leave her alone for a few minutes and went back to the car to find a change of clothes since the girl's clothes were all dirty. When Andreas returned, he found Paula lying with her head in the toilet bowl. The man immediately pulled the girl out, tried to give her first aid, and soon brought her to the hospital. When the 4-year-old girl was handed over to doctors, she no longer showed any signs of life. Doctors stated Paula dead. After the doctors on duty performed an initial examination and assessed the girl's condition, they realized that the story Andreas told them was full of inconsistencies. For example, the doctors determined at the first glance that the girl had bruises on her body and face, the nature of which could not be attributed to the information her foster father told them. Medical protocol in such cases requires doctors to contact the police. Indeed, the situation itself suggested this. Shortly after the police arrived, Andreas was arrested as a suspect in Paula's murder. Although Andreas said Paula has drowned in the toilet bowl, the autopsy of the body revealed something much darker. First of all, the test showed that the girl had been dead for about 24 hours when she arrived at the hospital, which doesn't fit with the man's version of events. The girl's foster father claimed that he gave Paula first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and that it all happened just 20 minutes before he took her to the hospital. On the other hand, the autopsy found that the girl has several broken ribs, multiple microtraumas, a cracked spine, and sepsis, which caused her death. It became apparent that Paula's death was not an accident, as her small body has a significant number of both recent and old injuries. Leonardo Salazar, the girl's father, learned of Paula's death on March 30th, 3 days after the events. His mother, who was still in Venezuela, had informed him of his daughter's death by the phone. She herself, in turn, learned it from Andrina's friend. It should be mentioned that after Leonardo has left Ecuador and Enrina had started a new relationship, she stopped all communication with him. That is why for 3 days Leonardo didn't know anything about her tragedy. Until that time, he could see her only through the pictures Enrina and his mutual friends had sent him. In addition, Enrina blocked Leonardo in all social media, preventing him from communicating with Paula. She also cut off communication with almost all of Leonardo's relatives. Andrina even turned almost all of their mutual friends against the girl's birth father, telling them about his lack of desire to communicate with Paula, and so Leonardo was able to learn of his daughter's death. However, Andreina's family informed him of an alternative cause of death. They told him that Paula died of complications caused by COVID. At the time, Ecuador, like the rest of the world, was under quarantine due to the pandemic. At the time, however, there were virtually no deaths from the coronavirus in the country. Leonardo was undoubtedly very suspicious that his daughter might have died from COVID, so he immediately began researching statistics on death from the virus in Ecuador. The statistics were posted on social media and news websites. Leonardo immediately noticed that there were no children among the few victims of the coronavirus in Ecuador. Leonardo's relatives helped him to investigate, and one of them soon sent him a newspaper article that mentioned the arrest of Andreas, who was suspected of killing Paula. Leonardo then began calling Andreina daily, and it wasn't until 10 days later that she decided to call him back herself. In that conversation, Andreina rather coldly informed Leonardo that Paula had died of COVID and that she could not give him more information because her lawyers had forbidden her to do so. The next step Leonardo took was to create a Facebook page together with an acquaintance of his dedicated to Paula, as well as an Instagram profile called Justice for Paula. The published posts caused a huge backlash across social media. Their main goal was to bring those responsible for his daughter's death to justice. On the same day that Andreina called Leonardo, she arrived at the morgue to begin dealing with her daughter's funeral. Even though the prosecutor, who worked on the case, asked for more time to investigate the body, but the girl's funeral took place on April 10, 2020. Andreina simply did not allow a second autopsy to be performed on the girl. Thanks to the information posted on social media, Andreina's friends, people in her circle, contacted Leonardo and told him about the sad life Paula had in the years before her death. They sent Leonardo the information they had, most of which was based on isolated recordings of conversations, photos, audio recordings, and similar things. According to witnesses, ever since Paula's mother moved in with Andreas, girl had to endure abuse from her stepfather as well as her own mother. Not only did Andrea allow her daughter to be treated this way, but she herself was directly involved in all of this. Everyone said that they only saw Paula happy and cheerful when she was playing alone. In the presence of her stepfather, the girl looked depressed, acted shy, and became suddenly very frightful. At one point, the little girl told people she knew that her mother and stepfather beat her because she misbehaved. One day she even confessed that as punishment, Andreas pushed her and she hit her head on the wall. Paula called her stepfather nothing less than a monster and was undoubtedly very afraid of him. The little girl constantly had nightmares, and as a young child, she already suffered from insomnia. The couple initially preferred that the girl, who was 2 years old at the time of moving into the stepfather's home, sleep alone. When falling asleep, she often cried, but no one paid any attention to her. In addition, her mother and stepfather forced her to tuck in on her own without help. Moreover, her mother, Andreina, had been teaching her how to cook since she was 2 years old. This was something out of the realm of reason. Paula was forced to cook her own breakfast and dinners because her mother liked to sleep in the mornings and take a break from the baby in the evening. She simply didn't want to take care of her daughter. Not only that, Andreina was not bothered by the fact that the girl has to cope with baking oven by herself despite the dangers. At the preschool where mother had placed Paula, girl constantly complained of pain in her legs and back and often stated that she could not walk. Her constant complaints as well as the bruises on her body forced the teacher to show her to the doctors at the health center. After an examination, they concluded that the girl was being mistreated in the family. The girl's teachers then called the special police organization so they could investigate the girl's abuse in her family. Officials took up the case and decided to send the girl somewhere she could be safe while the investigation process was underway. As a result, on October 16, 2019, Paula was temporarily transferred to her uncle and Reina's brother. A hearing on the case was set for December 4, 2019. Unfortunately, the teachers who were supposed to testify never showed up. For whatever reason, they were unable to attend this hearing. As a result, it was decided to schedule a retrial for February 27, 2020. But even this time, Paula's teachers simply did not show up. The court was forced to dismiss all charges against Paula's parents, and then she was returned to her mother. Exactly 1 month later, on March 27th, the girl died. And the exact reason the teachers did not want to attend either of the two hearings is still unknown. It is speculated that Andreina may have bribed the teachers or simply convinced them that although the girl had some problems, the parents were not responsible for what their daughter said about them. After Paula's death, Andreas was placed in protective custody for the duration of the investigation, but he soon appealed this decision. As a result, a hearing was held on June 12, 2020, in which the judge set a restraining order and also determined that the man could be released to house arrest. But during the hearing, which was held via video conference, Andreas announced that he was dropping his appeal at the time Leonardo was still engaged in a social media campaign. He also asked his subscribers for financial support to be able to travel from Trinidad and Tobago to Ecuador. He wanted to file a complaint against Andreina, Paula's mother, before it was too late. At the time, Andreina had not yet been charged and was free. Fortunately, Leonardo was able to obtain sufficient financial aid as well as free legal advice from two Ecuadorian lawyers, Oswaldo and Alejandro, who unselfishly offered him support and assistance in the lawsuit. Leonardo had to cross the border between Trinidad and Venezuela. He had to risk his life, float on a raft, and then cross the entire border from Natron to San Cristobal. He had to book private transfers since the pandemic had canceled all services and he could not use the usual routes to get to Ecuador. Because of the pandemic situation, all maritime and land borders of Venezuela were closed. So only few regular flights to 4 or 5 countries could be counted in the following months. Once Leonardo arrived in the state of Taquira, he had to cross the border into Colombia over rugged terrain, dangerous in itself. He then took a bus to the town of Ipaliso and continued on through the hills and plains to the Rumchek Bridge, the border between Colombia and Ecuador. Then Leonardo took a cab and drove to Quiro. On June 30th, he had a meeting with a lawyer. Immediately upon arrival, father of the deceased girl filed a complaint against the ex-girlfriend to also be considered as a suspect in Paula's murder. On July 6, 2020, Andreas was indicted and the woman appeared in court, which stated that she should not be remained in custody and the house arrest would be sufficient and that she had to report to justice twice a week. As a result, both Andreas and Enrina were charged with murder. The maximum punishment for which in the Ecuadorian Penal Code was about 13 years in prison. In November 2020, the first hearing in the case was held. At the time, a specific date for the start of the trial was still to be announced. During the hearing, Leonardo's attorney spoke to their concern about Andreina's possible escape, as she had previously attempted to take her own life with pills. They also applied for Andreina to be fitted with an electronic monitoring bracelet. The judge decided to grant the lawyer's request and also reduce the number of days the suspect had to appear in court to once a week instead of 2. However, a few days later, Andreina demanded to reconsider the decision of the necessity of wearing an electronic bracelet. On November 16th, another hearing was held to reconsider these decisions. Undoubtedly, all these details delayed the trial, but fortunately, the judge was able to set a date. It was set for December. The trial of Andreas and Andreina did not receive extensive media coverage. However, much of the information somehow made its way onto social media. And yet, because of the pandemic, which was a major topic in the information field, some of the facts went unreported. The trial began on January 14, 2021. At the time, there still wasn't any decision made about Andreina's alternative ways of imprisonment, and Andreas was held in the regional detention center. The trial was held behind closed doors, and no representative of the media was present. In addition, some of the participants connected to the hearing via video link. According to the doctor who performed the autopsy on the girl, Paula had nearly all of her spinal discs rebuilt. Some of her ribs were broken and some had already fused. This meant that the girl has broken ribs before, which had eventually healed on their own. She also had nail stigmata, a condition in which the nails grow into the skin, bruises and scratches on her face and body, fluid accumulation in her lungs, scars on her head, and lacerations on her column. According to the assessment, it was the later injuries that caused the infection to develop and gradually beat to sepsis, which ultimately caused death. The autopsy report also confirmed that by the time Paula was taken to the hospital by Andreas, she had been dead for about 24 hours. The amount of internal and external injuries reflected the level of cruelty to which the little girl had been subjected, as well as the level of carelessness shown by her guardians who had never once taken her to the doctors. On top of this, the girl was malnourished, underweight, and too diminutive for her age, with mineral and nutritional deficiencies. Regarding Paula's injuries, Reina, the girl's mother, tried to convince her family friends that the child has a lot of psychological problems, that the consequence of these problems was a tendency to self-torture through which Paula tried to attract attention to herself, according to the girl's mother. When her younger brother was born, Paula began to lack parental attention, stopped sleeping at night, and tried to manipulate everyone through crying. The trial also revealed that in October 2019, when Paula was supposed to remain in her uncle's custody according to the board's decision, she actually continued to stay at her parents' house and only slept at her uncle's house for a few nights. In other words, the measures taken by the police it was possible to establish that in 2017, only a few months after Leonardo's departure from Ecuador, the girl began to suffer from abuse. It most likely began immediately after Reina entered into relationship with Andreas. The trial was attended by more than 40 witnesses of the accusing party, who were able to confirm the fact that Paula had to endure abuse for at least 3 years of her short life. At the last hearing, before the judge handed down the verdict, Reina stated that she took sole responsibility for the child's abuse. The woman claimed that she herself had beaten Paula with the belt and at times with her fists. Through this statement, the girl's mother actually attempted to remove blame from her man. She said directly that he was innocent, that he had nothing to do with it, and that he had never mistreated Paula. Reina also stated that she chastised her daughter for causing her problems with her new husband. Breaking up with her new husband meant being back on the streets and losing the financial stability she could only have around this man. Taking care of her daughter was her last priority. After becoming acquainted with Paula's life situation, the judges were concerned about the couple's newborn son. But it's safe to say that this child, unlike Paula, was never abused. It must be said that Andreas has indeed chosen to exercise his right to remain silent and has never made any statement about the incident since his arrest. By the February 3, 2021, Paula's trial was finished and the couple was sentenced. Both defendants were found guilty of murdering the girl. The maximum sentence for this crime is 13 years. Leonardo's original attorneys and the accusing party demanded exactly the maximum punishment for the perpetrators. But the chief judge decided to take into account an aggravating factor, namely that Paula was only 4 years old, which means that she could not defend herself against her attackers. As a result, the judge sentenced Reina and Andreas to 17 years and 4 months in prison. According to Ecuadorian law, the convicts have 3 days to appeal the verdict. So the couple was expected to appeal immediately. Even though Reina was sentenced to 17 years and 4 months in prison, she still remained on house arrest and not went to jail. The fact is that the woman used her opportunity to appeal, so now the higher court needs to confirm her sentence for incarceration. In the meantime, the woman continues to comply with the measures that were originally taken. This is not the case with Andreas, as he was arrested at the time of his appearance at the hospital with a dead girl. Undoubtedly, the fact that Reina is still at large is causing public indignation and anger. Most importantly, the anger of Leonardo, who is worried that the woman might take advantage of the situation to escape justice. From our part, we express our sympathy to Paula's father and wish him, in time, to recover from his terrible grief and obtain justice for Paula. Thank you so much for watching and exploring these cold cases with me. If you found the video interesting, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to NA Cold Cases for more deep dives into the unsolved and unexplained.